Oops. And apologies, I've just had a colleague remind me that I didn't press the record button. So today's webinar will be recorded to assist in spreading the message further. So, yes, we undertook 24 focus groups to dig deeper into some of the qualitative data associated with volunteering. That data, all of it, the focus groups transcripts, the public survey data, the leaders of volunteering data, that all went to a team at the University of WA who undertook a rigorous academic analysis. And then the report that we launched is about 70 pages, and it really provides a great overview of what volunteering looks like in our state today. So, in terms of some of the key insights, high level, 58.9% of Victorians in general are volunteers. So that equates to over 3 million people, adults who are 15 plus. In general, the size of contribution looks like it's about 222 hours per year, or on average, about 18.5 hours per month by each individual. And that lends itself to approximately $27 billion in value. Now, for anyone who is, really in the depths of detail around volunteering, you will know that there are many, many ways in which we calculate the financial dollar figure related to the value that volunteering generates. We haven't lent into that too hard in this report. Suffice to say that there is a lot of value generated by volunteering here in Victoria. If you want a much more rigorous, cost and benefits analysis, that is included in our 2020 report. So I'd urge you, if you're into wanting to dive into that financial benefit piece, to look in depth at that 2020 report. Well, what does this look like when it is young people in comparison to the rest of the population? So, for many of you, you might actually be surprised to know that 69.4% of 15 to 24-year-olds volunteer, which is higher than the average statewide. And I think there are quite often, particularly in established formal volunteer organisations, a lot of myths or stereotypes about where are the young people? There are no young volunteers. And so it's really, really wonderful to have this statistic really demonstrate and represent how far above the state average across all age groups young people are. They give a lot. When asked around increasing their involvement over the next 3 years, actually a third of those volunteers said that they expected to increase their volunteer involvement, so 28.9%. That contribution looked like 271 hours contributed per year, and that was actually the highest average of all ages. So again, just really smashing that myth around where are the young volunteers out of the water. And, that's one of the things that we're keen to dive into in some of the discussion is, if that myth exists, why and where are young people volunteering? And it may be that, young people are volunteering in different types of organizations or in different types of ways than your more traditional volunteer roles. So the survey asked about key motivations and preferences. And in fact, young volunteers are volunteering in different ways. 25.1% of young people volunteer from home or online. And that was the highest percentage of all ages. 44% of younger people also prefer to volunteer with others, which I think really does encapsulate some of the major drivers when it comes to volunteering. And we'll talk about volunteering and well-being later further on. But I think that quote from State of Volunteering report does really share that, for this age group, volunteering isn't just about service. It's about gaining skills for future employment. It's about that connection. connection with each other, and building community. Some of those key motivations that came back, that top four, were a key motivator for young people was helping others because they can, to use skills and experience because no one else is doing it. So this is a generation that is really wanting to pull up sleeves and pitch in where they can. In terms of some of the biggest barriers and costs for young people, the highest five reasons that came through that State of Volunteering survey were work and study commitments, income costs and expenses, family responsibilities, some other social interests, and lack of transport, which again can feed into some of those income costs and other expenses. In fact, on average, according to the research, volunteering costs young people about $16.14 per hour to engage in, which, when you average it out over the cost of the year, equates to over $4,000 of costs absorbed by younger volunteers. When we asked about, ability to reimburse, young people were actually among the least likely to even ask about reimbursement, probably assuming that wasn't possible. So again, a lot of this is just food for thoughts in terms of how can you structure your programs to minimize that for volunteers. It's absolutely acknowledged it's not always possible with financial barriers, but I was visiting a volunteer involving organization the other day who, provided their volunteers with Met cards, to get to and fro volunteering to subsidize the cost of that public transport per young people. So it is possible to try and minimize the impact on younger volunteers where possible. Younger volunteers also told us through the research that their key recruitment channels were really things like social media and also traditional media. So less focused on necessarily word of mouth sometimes, even though we know that can be a really high way of generating interest in volunteering. But social media in particular was identified as a key way individuals found out about volunteering opportunities. And when we say social media, and this is discussed a little bit in the general report, we don't just mean that your organization has a Facebook page. So making sure that you are continuing to engage digitally and evolve where you are on social media. Younger people are, I show my age when I say I still have a Facebook account in terms of how youth engage in social media. So making sure that, your organization is investing the time in dabbling in social media channels that youth are across. One of the things that the State of Volunteering research looked at was also well-being, well-being of volunteers versus non-volunteers. And while less pronounced than some other sort of age groups or, groups that we looked at as a subset of the individual volunteer data, youth volunteers did report an average wellbeing scores 2 points higher than youth who didn't volunteer. So volunteering can really be a protective factor against loneliness, social isolation, and I believe Finn, has a little bit to talk about that in terms of some of the data that he's there. So we have that statistical, I guess, validation around that well-being. There are lots and lots of other well-being indicators that studies around volunteering and well-being in general, physical well-being, reduction of loneliness, but through the State of Volunteering research, youth volunteers had a better well-being than non-volunteers. So that's just a little bit of a high level snapshot in terms of what the youth specifically were telling us through that volunteering, state of volunteering report, and how some of that differs, I guess, with some of the overarching uh, state averages, and generalized trends. Some of those general trends that came through the state of volunteering research, and again, some of these may not be news to those who've uh, come along to that forum launch, is that volunteering is not declining but transitioning. I think quite often we can lean in a little bit to doom and gloom in the volunteering sector around where are all the volunteers, formal volunteerism, yes, is on the decline, but actually we're seeing a major system disruptor when it comes to volunteering, and volunteering is changing. The way people want to do it, people want to do it more flexibly, people want to do it digitally, people want to engage in a whole different way, and we as a sector need to rise and respond to those changes. Informal, flexible digital volunteering is on the rise, and those desires, particularly, that statistic around volunteering from home, that's even more pronounced among youth, called communities, and people with disabilities. So youth are among those who are telling us they want to volunteer differently, wanting to be involved in co-designing their opportunities, and engaging in those more flexible and informal opportunities. So our formal structures and supports, the way in which we engage volunteers, have been failing to keep pace with these shifts. And these are things like the costs that individuals incur. And, obviously some of that is reflected in that financial analysis around how much it costs to volunteer, some of the red tape pieces that we have, and complexity, just not knowing how to engage, where to engage. They can be barriers to entry and continuation. So we've already tried to do a lot of work as a sector, but we have to keep continuing to try and tackle some of those issues to make sure our formal structures and support are able to keep pace with the shifts of what volunteers want. Volunteers in general are more purpose driven, and that is actually more pronounced for younger volunteers. And they're particularly looking for roles with meaning, impact, alignment to personal values. And that is so, so important to young volunteers. And, in particular, we often find that is reflective of young volunteers wanting to own the experience and, not necessarily just being content to become a passive participant in an established formal volunteering role, but youth want to be driving issues and causes that they care about and spending their time volunteering in that way. And finally, this should be news to no one on the call, I imagine, but behind every volunteer is someone making it happen. So we know that the unseen infrastructure that supports volunteering is under-resourced and at risk. So many leaders of volunteers are a bit older, unpaid, or managing programs without any formal support or formal organizational support, including things like operating on a shoestring budget. So recognizing that really compounds a lot of the issues or some of the challenges that I've outlined above. Now, ways in which we can try as a sector to adapt to youth needs, in general, are by increasing that role flexibility and supporting digital participation. And let me say at the outset, we know these things are challenging when you're under-resourced, and there are, lots of, and it can be a matter of trial and error. So Volunteering Victoria is going to be focusing particularly on the issue of role flexibility and, supporting digital participation, understanding digital tools as part of series and ongoing engagement about how we can bring to life some of the learnings from the state of volunteering. But I would urge you, if you're feeling overwhelmed by the notion of role flexibility, take some time, put in a brainstorm, call a sector peer, and start to think it through. And really, just there will be an amount of trial and error when it comes to engaging in um, designing role flexibility. Talk to some of your existing volunteers. Think about how roles could be adapted to be more flexible or to meet their needs better. Often things are, things that increase role flexibility. It's not a complete 180 shift. It can also often be a little tweak or a shift that dramatically increases the flexibility of a particular role. You can improve and provide visibility and clarity on how to get involved. Focus on preferred mediums, social and traditional media, but also go to places that youth are. So again, think about going on different forums, um, Facebook Good Karma networks, youth are not going to be checking out your Facebook page necessarily and following you, but make sure you're posting on a shared community forum when it comes to Facebook, for example. Consider TikTok, which I know can be a really, really daunting thing, but always worth trying. Consider offsetting or reimbursing expenses where possible. We know this isn't always achievable for organizations, but again, remember little changes can make a vast amount of difference. It might be as simple as providing lunches or morning tea so individuals don't feel stressed about getting feeding themselves while they're on a volunteer shift. It might be trying to offset some of those transport costs or, maybe having a shared Met card that you can, Mikey card that you can loan out. It might be, making sure you're covering the cost of uniforms or materials, making sure that volunteers really have, as we know that even asking for reimbursement can sometimes be a barrier to achieving reimbursement. So where possible, try and avoid that being a conversation in and of itself. It's really important to foster inclusive and respectful environments free from stigma and gatekeeping. So if a young person has an idea, embrace it, try it. Don't say, oh no, our community would never do that. Or, think about embracing things like pronouns, even if it hasn't been your practice up until now. Pronouns can be a really, really great visual signal and external sign that you're a welcoming and inclusive environment. Listen to young people and co-design volunteering opportunities that reflect their reality, and start young. So if you as an organization are inclusive of family needs, you'll build a future generation of volunteers. Individuals who view their parents volunteering are far, far, far more likely to engage in volunteering. And, that may be uh, we're building a future generation of volunteers and giving individuals, young people, a chance to really feel like they're having an impact. So that may be as young as I had some friends do a little bake sale with their kids to organize to raise funds for their school walkathon. Even little steps like this can foster a culture of volunteering that goes a long, long way. So now I am actually going to hand over to Finn, who we have the pleasure of joining us from YACVIC, to talk a little bit about what he does at YACVIC and how, YACVIC perspective. So I'll hand over now.
Amazing. Thanks, Sarah. I've been taking notes as you've been talking because a lot of these things, like it's great to hear the report come alive, and all of the things that you're saying are things that we know, but it's so great to have the data to back it up. So yeah, amazing work. So as Sarah said, I'm Finn. I use he, him pronouns. I am from YACVIC, so the Youth Affairs Council of Victoria, and I'm our Youth Participation Officer. So we thought it was a good fit that I'd come to this meeting. I support everything we do at Yakvik in ensuring that it has youth voice involved, that young people are involved as much as possible. And then I also coordinate our group of young peer facilitators that come on trainings with us, that get involved in all of our projects. And they're just amazing. And it's literally the best part of the job. Could you go to the next slide, please?
Yes.
Thank you. So a little bit more about Yakvik and some resources that might be helpful. And then I'll have a bit more of a yap or a yarn about like my story and things that might be helpful for you, like tips about engagement. So yeah, Yakvik is the peak body for young people and youth workers in the state. So basically that we're this like the volunteering Victoria version of the in the sector. We advocate to government on issues that affect young people and are really like prioritize championing young people's voices and ensuring that they have voice at the table, that they have basically have the ability to make input on decisions that affect them. And when we talk about this and we do training, I love posing the question of like, so what issue doesn't affect young people? And sometimes I've had people be like, oh, retirement. And yeah, maybe for some young people that's not an issue that affects them. But for me, my dad's just about to retire. I'm only just over a young person. So someone important in my life is related to that's connected to me because he's going to retire. And in this cost of living crisis, man, we got to be thinking about money these days. Some helpful resources that we have created that would be helpful for you in terms of engaging young people in volunteering. Our amazing youth engagement resource platform, or YERP. Yes, I know lots of acronyms. I'm so sorry. This is pretty much our engagement website. So if you head over there and I'll put some links in the chat when I finish talking. But yeah, basically it's got over 100 resources, half are for young people and half are for people who work with young people about how to engage them generally. So there's some general tips about like online engagement, online advocacy, but also specifically around volunteering, because we know and we hear anecdotally a lot that young people are involved in, well, pretty much all the young people that I engage with have multiple like advocacy roles or are engaging in multiple volunteering roles. So we built some resources to support that. So there's one for young people that's just called volunteering, but I put it in the slide as how young people can get involved in volunteering. So if you have young people that you know of that you want to get involved, or like they want to volunteer, but they're a bit nervous, not sure, you can send like that resource is a great start. And then we did some work with DECA, and they were really keen to have a resource around how to support young people in environmental volunteering. So it's a really specific sort of case study, but I still think it's really useful. The same sort of, while it's specific to environmental volunteering, the same principles apply, and I think that can be helpful. Also, very much encourage you to go have a search around the site and see what else might be helpful for you. We also have our Code of Ethical Practice for the Victorian youth sector that is being launched on Wednesday, actually, which is super exciting. And it's been a couple of years in the making. This is as it says, ethical practice, like code of conduct that outlines the ways in which it's safe to work with young people. And while it is for the youth sector, it is a voluntary code that can be picked up by anyone. So if you work face-to-face with a young person, we strongly encourage you to work towards this code to ensure that your practice is safe. Next slide, please.
Of course.
Thank you so much. So like I said before, most young people that we work with and that are working at Yakvik, because we have quite a lot of young workers at Yakvik, are currently involved in lots of different opportunities, including volunteering. And I know for myself personally, like I got into this sector through volunteering. It was a really big part of my journey. I started volunteering at my local headspace. I volunteered for my local council, or actually a lot of local councils that were in the area, including Knox City Council, which I'm pretty sure is online at the moment. So shout out to them. And it was a big part of how I started to build my professional identity. But also I'm a big community person. I'm a trans young person. And so having like being able to give back to my community was really, really important. I wanted to make a change. I wanted to educate people on pronouns, on identity. And I got to do that through the volunteering that I was doing. Also got to make, lots of amazing friends. I got to do crafting activities because I'm a very crafty person. So it was fulfilling in that way as well. And like Sarah was saying, that volunteering is like linked to better well-being. We actually did a collab with Transgender Victoria a couple of years ago when they launched their recent study, Affirmation, Friendship, and Volunteerism, Understanding and Facilitating What Makes LGBTQIA+ Young People in Australia Feel Good About Themselves. Very long title, but basically like one of those 3 pillars of young people, of protective fact. Oh my God, let me start that again. One of the 3 pillars of the protective factors for young people's mental health was volunteerism. And there's some beautiful quotes in there about how young people felt empowered, connected, just better about feeling like improve their self-esteem as well when they were volunteering, especially within their community. And we know that LGBTQIA+ young people are some of the young people that can be the most isolated and lonely, especially when we're thinking about rural and regional areas. Other couple of points I wanted to speak to was social media. It sounds like we've got some apprehensiveness about using social media in the room. That's totally normal. Like, completely understand that. What is TikTok? I don't even know. I use it, but I don't know. And yeah, I just wanted to say, totally understand those nerves and those feels, but using those platforms doesn't have to be as scary as it sounds. And I think some helpful tips around that might be about what it looks like to use social media. So it's like recording a video that talks about what your volunteer opportunity might be, that walks a video that walks you through the sorry, distracted in the background, a video that walks you through the center or walks you through an activity that the young person might be involved in volunteering. So I'm thinking about that example of environmental volunteering. So taking footage of young people who might already be involved, or just not just all the rest of the volunteer crew in their planting or weeding or whatever it might be, so that young people have a really good visual, a really good understanding of what the opportunity is. And it's also engaging. Like, I want to know from social media, I want to know what I'm getting into, basically. So that might be some helpful tips. Other thing is, young people want to see themselves reflected in these spaces, especially volunteering, because they want that community, right? So if you're showing social media moments with other young people involved, it's more likely to get more young people involved. Yeah, that is a couple of my tips, but we can chat more about that towards the end. That's it from me. Do you have anything? Is that all good, Sarah?
Yeah, thank you so much, Finn. And it's a really good reminder, actually, in terms of the video content from social media. We talk a lot, I see some familiar names on this call about things like role descriptions and position descriptions. They're really about setting expectations and making sure everyone's on the same page. And there's no reason that expectation setting can't start through some of your social media advertising, reach out, activity building. Really that's what doing a tour around the center will ultimately achieve. And I think sometimes we can get in our head about, oh my gosh, I have to do a dance or learn what flossing is. That's not necessarily the case, but it's just about showing what the reality is, and building that, I guess, warm and welcoming space for young people. So, just to wrap it up before we go into some discussion time, and given the amount of us, we might break into a few breakout groups and just have a quick 10-minute discussion and then come back for some thoughts reflected. Um, in terms of some of our general state of volunteering report implications, things that we in Volunteering Victoria are going to be focused on over the next year is looking at how we can support everyone to think about flexibility as a core design principle for volunteer roles. A clear pattern emerged from the research. Volunteering must become more flexible to remain viable, and flexible and informal roles are essential. So rigid models no longer suit most volunteers. And again, this can feel like a daunting task. It could be as little as trying to stagger shift times or recognize that you might have a volunteering cohort that goes away to Queensland for 3 months over the winter. There are ways to build in some of that flexibility. As I said, it doesn't have to be a complete 180 of all of your volunteer roles that exist already. But the key principle is that flexibility needs to be built into the design of roles. And the best way that you can do this to make sure some of the assumptions that you're building is to include volunteers and include young people in that design. We must, as a sector, learn to embrace some of those digital tools, but recognize that we want to do that without losing people and knowing that there's a lot of transformation and platform and social media fatigue that exists out there. So we want to make sure digital platforms that we're using and investing in as a sector are accessible, intuitive, and aligned with where people are online. There's no point channeling megabucks into, I don't know, Twitter, if it is not where people are nowadays. We also, and this is particularly pertinent when it comes to youth volunteering, want to make sure that volunteering is positioned as a pathway to growth. Finn's obviously mentioned some of the opportunities he had and how that built a career. I certainly often will say to groups that I'm talking to that I first learned to speak to a group of people through my own volunteering activities starting at 16. So volunteering is a really vital stepping stone for skills and employment. And I think when you're really trying to make your volunteer roles attractive to young people, making sure you have the tools and language up your sleeve to help them position the volunteer opportunities as part of that pathway. It's not something, ChatGPT is not necessarily going to help you out in every circumstance in the workplace. And so volunteering particularly can build a lot of those soft skills that are required for confidence within the workplace. And then the final thing that we as VV are really going to be focused on is strengthening the sustainability of volunteer leadership. So we know that the sector needs training support, succession planning, and we're really going to be focusing our resources and efforts based on what came through that report to tackle some of those questions. Now, I've listed a whole bunch of further resources here, some of which are driven by Volunteering Victoria. There's a great webinar that we did in March with the Commission for Children and Young People, which was a Q&A session on the child safe standards. The recording of that is uploaded to our website. We've got, Justice Connect also have a youth engagement guide, and that's particularly helpful when it comes to inclusion of volunteers below the age of 18. Now, we know that a lot of people have, rightly so, some nerves about being able to meet the requirements of the child safe standards, but particularly that Justice Connect guide is really, really helpful and provides some really good general guidance, particularly if you're trying to engage young people from 15 to 18. There's also, lots of articles and resources, particularly on the National Student Volunteer Week website. And we actually just celebrated National Student Volunteer Week on from the 4th of the 10th to August. So it will come around sooner than we would like again next year. So make sure that you have something wonderful to celebrate by having some young people and students involved in that by the time we get to August next year. DSS ran a great youth engagement campaign called Hanging Out to Help Out. I've linked to that, as well as the YERP site that Finn mentioned. So in terms of, we've got, I guess, about 20 minutes left in terms of our time to take a bit of a deep dive as a cohort. In terms of the questions that I thought it would be great if you all go off and have a little bit of a discussion on, What barriers do you personally in your organization have to engage with young people? What have you encountered? What are some good examples of youth engagement that you've seen, if any, or you're just like, I've got nothing? And then what, if any, resources would you like to develop? I'm going to stop sharing my Volunteering Victoria to Develop. I'm going to stop sharing my slides there. And I'll go, we do have a raised hand from Ballarat Foundation. So I'll let Nina speak and then I'll pop you out into breakout rooms if you would like. Nina, I can see, yeah.
Hi, it's Lisa from Ballarat Foundation. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hi.
Hi. Look, I'm just wondering, you said in the slides that 69.4% of 15 to 24-year-olds were volunteering. Do we have any data or statistics for people under 18?
It's not broken down from the categories that existed were just between 15 to 24. Unfortunately, we don't have it broken down at that level. I agree, there would be some value in understanding, what volunteering looks like under 18, knowing how challenging implementing some of the child safe standards has been for some organisations, and that a lot of organisations have made the decision to, limit volunteering to under 18, over 18 years of age.
We've just found, Sarah, that is the biggest barrier, especially in our region, is that trying to get volunteer roles for people under 18.
Yeah, yeah. And I'll note that I'm going to put you on the spot a little, Lisa, through some of the volunteer management activity work. Ballarat Foundation did some great work doing a project pitch. There's a case study on the inclusion resources on the Volunteering Victoria website that you can check out. But yeah, it is a huge challenge. And that's where I think we need to, as ambassadors for volunteering, across the sector, really both encourage people to think a bit differently and more flexibly around volunteer roles, think about whether we can build partnerships with schools, because that can, I think, be a real assistive factor in reducing some of the challenges related to red tape there, but also thinking about how we can continue encouraging individuals to give to causes, things like event participation and volunteering. And it is a huge challenge. I'm just sort of looking at the other questions that have appeared in the chat. Was there a metro, regional, rural breakdown? Unfortunately, we don't have that through the State of Volunteering research. We have done snapshots on various demographics. So the report itself looks at called volunteers, youth volunteers, people with disability, people with mental health concerns. There was actually a breakdown in there for regional and rural volunteers in the snapshot data, but it doesn't have a direct comparison for metro, regional, rural, or a breakdown by map. That simply wasn't possible in terms of the data and the scale that the report operated under. Wonderful. So Jen has popped those questions into the chat. For those who are still online, are people happy to go into some smaller breakout rooms just to continue the discussion further? We'll do that just for 10 minutes and then come together at the end if people are happy to. I will just get those going, but understand that some of you may have to head off. And thank you for tuning in to this deep dive. So I'm just going to create 2 breakout rooms, and we'll see you in 8 minutes or so.
I came in on one a little bit late, but I totally agree with the lady. Was it Teddy from Warnville somewhere? I'm Margaret. I'm with Red Cross, and also regional rural groups. It's transferring kids and getting them to and from, depending whether it's transport oriented. But yeah, it's pretty tricky, and we find that I find that some of them down this way might be with their sporting clubs, etc., etc. But otherwise, facilitating their travel is a little bit trickier. And just on a quick note, like with Red Cross, because of some of the private and confidential work we do, I think there is a ceiling on 18 years plus. And just a little bit further on that, someone mentioned uni students. Yes, we have had some applications, but the only trouble is if they choose to use it as a work placement, there's a rigmarole of check and induction and that goes with it. So by the time some of those approvals come through, their time at uni is done.
Yeah. And reducing some of the red tape, is a constant challenge for our sector, and we know why some of those checks and balances exist. There are ways in which, the way we communicate about these things can make it easier, simpler. Police check processes are pretty good nowadays in terms of coming back really quickly, but it is a constant way in which our formal opportunities do have to keep up and consider how we rise to that challenge. Any other reflections? I thought I saw someone else take themselves off mute.
It's just Caroline from Red Cross, and I was just going to make a comment about some of the most successful youth volunteering experiences I've seen have all involved the youth actually taking lead on the projects or being at the centre of the design, which is particularly what you talked about before, but giving them the ownership, knowing they've got that guidance, giving them the ownership of the project. And just as an example, we had a social media team, fully youth, fully remote. They're all over the world, and they run our state-based Facebook and Instagram page. And I volunteer managed that group for a period of 2 years along with our team, and they were just amazing. They taught us so much in that time. And, Slack, Trello, all the things I had to learn. I didn't know what I was talking about, but anyway, I winged it, faked it until I made it. But really successful models of participation. Another one was Youth Parliament, and we may have worked with the Youth Council, Affairs Council. I can't quite remember, but getting the kids involved or the young people involved in having a voice and supporting them and guiding them and really give them purpose that they're aligned with.
And I so echo those points involving in designers fundamentally, which, I absolutely acknowledge when you're time poor can feel a little daunting, but remember it's about that investment. To say if we're spending the time on engaging young people, it may seem like a slightly larger time spend in really taking this time to construct and deconstruct volunteer roles and consider how they might be structured in a more appealing way. But, that time always more than pays for itself, that investment. Any other thoughts and reflections? I've noticed, I'm just scanning the chat. Everybody would be very excited about the notion of supported travel, free Myki cards. So we'll add that on the list of things to, continue advocating to state government on. You know, we certainly have raised transport costs before, but I will make sure our CEO knows that's a sector endorsed idea. And just so you are all aware, all of the resources from today's webinar will be available. We'll send a follow-up email with the PowerPoints. This is one in a series. So deep dive next month, and we're running them all on a Monday at this time slot. Deep dive next month, we'll be looking at called volunteers and then digital media. So I have time to learn Trello, Slack, and you know, make myself a TikTok star will happen the month after. But you know, we're really hoping to continue our engagement across the sector around the State of Volunteering report. There's also, we're seeking expressions of interest currently for a State of Volunteering action group, just a little reference group that hopefully will guide any of the resources and efforts that we create as part of our State of Volunteering report response. So if you're interested in being involved in that at all, do put in an expression of interest. Obviously, if all of you who are on the call today apply to be a part of that, we won't be able to have everyone on that action group, but we've just asked you to state what's motivating you to be a part of that and, you know, what sort of skills and experience you bring. We know that we're at a critical point when it comes to volunteering here in Victoria. And so that group will just have the opportunity to help guide us at VV in terms of our response. Any other final thoughts or reflections? Just a huge thank you to Finn for taking the time to join us today. You know, you shared some real pearls of wisdom. So really grateful for your time. Any other thoughts, reflections? Wonderful. That's bang on 1 o'clock. So I hope everyone has a really great rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone.